Very much so. I made him change it a couple of weeks ago, but it's slow again. Yeah. All right, it's good to see everybody. We're going to go ahead and start with a prayer. Since Matt has finally returned, we're going to let him lead us in prayer.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we come to you this evening. We are thankful as always for all the many ways that you have blessed us, that even though we are undeserving, that you have called us to you, that you have adopted us as your children. We thank you for this evening that you've given us to come together to study your word. We ask that you bless Josh and the other teachers now as they instruct us in your ways. And we also ask your blessing upon us so that we can hear what they have to say, so that we can receive it, and that we can take what we have learned and become better servants of yours. Be with all those of this congregation who are sick, whether physically or spiritually. Bless them, Father, and help them to return to you. All these things we pray in your Son Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay, we are in Nehemiah 13, like the last 3 verses. Pretty much we're right there at the end. Nehemiah 13. Nehemiah 13 is an interesting chapter. It really kind of starts, I wish that they had left the first 3 verses in the previous chapter, because that really is the end of that narrative. But in verse 4, we kind of fast forward. What happened between verse 3 and verse 4? Remind me. Yeah, it's really jarring, isn't it? We go straight from in verses 2 through 3, they're hearing all these things, don't let any Ammonites or Moabites enter the assembly, and we got rid of all of them. We did it. We did what we're supposed to. And then the very next section, they're doing nothing of what they were supposed to. But what happened? There's a big event that took place, a very important event that happens between verse 3 and verse 4. We don't find out about it till like verse 7 or 8. What happened? Nehemiah left. Seems small. Just one guy, right? I mean, that's all. Just one guy. But yeah, he left. And so we've got at least a year to 2 years of time, depending upon how you want to read that phrase of after some time. And he comes back and he finds this. We're not talking about decades. Most of the scholarly writing that I looked at, they don't think it was decades. They don't think it was even several years. They think it's as short as a year. And he comes back and everything has fallen apart. In the first section, verse 4 through verse 9, what is the first thing that fell apart? Yeah. Tobiah, what nationality was he? The Ammonite, is living in the storehouse of God. Okay, there's like so much wrong with that sentence, I don't know where to start with that. One, Tobiah has been the enemy for good 14 years now. He was an enemy before Nehemiah came. He was an enemy while Nehemiah was there. He's still an enemy. How come he was allowed to live here? Yeah, not just any of the priests. The high priest let him. Eliashib the priest made this room for him because they were related to each other. Now that brings a whole host of questions in as well. Are we saying Eliashib is part Ammonite? I don't know. I think it's probably by marriage. I'm going to go with that route. But yeah, he lets him come in there. Now, because you've got someone living in the storehouse, we've got a new problem that arises, and that's the second section there, from verse 10 down through verse 14. What's the new problem? Tithing is the issue. The Levites and the singers went home because nobody's bringing in their tithes. Well, nobody's bringing in their tithes. Well, yeah, we know they're not because someone lives in the barn. It's kind of obvious, right? You fill up the warehouse because the warehouse was empty. So the Levites went home, the singers went home, so they're not doing their work anymore. It seems like the priests still are. It seems like the priests are still being taken care of, but the Levites are not. And we talked about tithing, that all of the people tithed to support the Levites and those individuals. They tithed to support the priests. So it seems like that second tier of tithing kept going, but the first tier of tithing had fallen off. So Nehemiah has to whip that into shape. What's the next issue? Oh, you got a comment?
Does all this take place after the reading of the law?
Yes. It seems like after the reading of the law and after Nehemiah left. So in that 1 to 2 years, it all falls away. But yeah, they knew. They read the law fully on at least 2 occasions in the 12 years that Nehemiah was with them. Probably more often, but we can guarantee at least twice they fully read the law.
I got the impression from verse 4 that the law was read after all this took place.
Yeah, I think verse 4 is trying to move us further along. It's a weird way of putting it, the phrase "now before this." That's just, I'm just going off what they tell me. Because in English, it sounds like it all happened a long time ago, but they say it didn't. They say this is a post-return time period, which is kind of what we get from verse 6. But you're right. It's a weird phrase. And sometimes in Hebrew, we get some of those difficult phrases. Any other comments? Anybody on this side? Okay. What's our third issue here? We've got somebody's living in the temple who shouldn't be, or just anybody's living in the temple, and they shouldn't be. The tithing has fallen off. What's the other one? Sabbath. We've got people who just continue to work on the Sabbath, bringing in their things and bringing out their things. We've got foreigners coming in, and they're selling and trading, and things like that are going on, and everything is it's just like it was a Friday. There was no change, no impact at all. So he has to confront that. He has to fix it, going so far as to make sure the gates are closed, putting up his own guards to threaten to assault individuals to make sure that they get out of the way. And then we have another one, verse 23. What's another issue? Yeah, strange women. They have married the women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. And I made the point that if you look at these 3 things here, the tithing, the Sabbath, and the marrying of women, this is the covenant that they made back in chapter 9. This is what they said they would not do. This is what they said, I will make sure to keep the Sabbath, I make sure to keep the tithing, and I'll make sure to marry only the people I'm supposed to be marrying, and this is all of what they broke. And that really brings us to where we are tonight, around verse 28. Does anybody have any comments or thoughts before we really get into 28? Mm-hmm.
I think it highlights the usefulness of tradition in obeying God. Because there are a lot of things that we do because we have already thought through that issue and we've settled it and we've been doing it right for decades.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a point at which they're basically having to start over. And so just as soon as Nehemiah is not there exerting his will anymore, then it all just falls apart.
Yeah. It totally shows the importance of a leader. Really, the history of the Jews, any history of the Jews shows the importance of a leader. When they have a strong leader, they do just fine. Without it, they fall apart pretty quick. As this one, it doesn't seem like he was gone very long and fell apart pretty quick. Okay. So in verse 28 and 29, we don't have a specific question about that one because it's kind of lumped in with the other one. But we get one specific little instance about a certain man doing something he shouldn't be doing. What was going on here, 28 and 29? Yeah, you guys got to try to say these names. We've got one of the sons of who? Yes. One of the sons of Jehoiada, the son of Eliashib, the high priest. So we have a priestly lineage we're talking about. Grandson of the high priest. Is the son-in-law of who? Okay. There's only so many names of the enemies of the people of God right now that we know, and in one chapter, they're married to 2 of them. I think the Arab guy, Gershom, or whatever his name was, he's the only guy not mentioned in this chapter. Okay. This is a big deal. How does Nehemiah respond? Thank you. The laugh is just so great. Yeah, what does he do? He chases him out. Yeah, he says, no, you can't do this. He can't be intermarried with somebody else. Remember, there's specific laws in, I think it is in Leviticus. It's my favorite book. If it's not, it's in Deuteronomy, but I think it's in Leviticus towards the end of it. And it tells you who is a priest allowed to marry. There's regulations on the kind of woman he is allowed to marry. She should be of a certain kind of family and a certain kind of demeanor and a certain reputation. I mean, it's very specific. The daughter of Sanballat the Horonite does not fit any of that. I mean, I don't need to know anything else about him other than his name is Sanballat the Horonite, and I know he does not fit that qualification. Anybody got any thoughts? So what does he want God to remember? He wants me to remember me for good. In this case, he's got something specific because they have done what? Yeah, they desecrated the priesthood and the covenant of the priesthood and the Levites. So not only did they do the priesthood wrong, they messed up the relationship between God and the priests. That's a big deal here. The temple's not been here very long, this new temple. The new worship has not been here very long. The city itself has not been here for very long, and they're already ruining that relationship. Already. Any thoughts before we get the last question? Question 12. Yeah. I imagine in Babylonian captivity, a lot of older individuals would sit around and say, if we had just kept the Sabbath. I can just see it. You can just hear these conversations. And yet, here they come now. Because God was pretty specific. Doug, you had a comment.
Yeah, I think in these cases, even though it's a short period of time when they fall away, we don't really get a lot of sense of how they get there.
Yeah.
But I suspect it wasn't one day they got up and said, that whole covenant thing, none of that's important, right? It was probably a series of compromises.
Yeah.
Does it really matter who I marry? Does it really matter? Does God really care about that? And so, it erodes it away.
And you could get a lot of political power marrying Sanballat's daughter. Yeah, Matt.
And I think that's exactly the issue. It's not coincidence that you have all these powerful Jews ending up marrying the descendants of the bad guys.
Yeah.
Because what worldly wisdom says, if you're surrounded by all these enemies, then you want to try to convert them into friends by marriage alliances.
Wait, are you quoting Solomon over there? I mean, because that's what he did.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Nehemiah's whole point. Yeah.
And it is a reminder, I think, that what seems wise and obvious to the wisdom of the world is not necessarily godly. And we have to be wary of doing things that make sense to the world that are not in accordance with the law of God.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Question 12. All right, last two verses of the book. How does Nehemiah summarize his work? What's he say? Yeah, he's like, this is what I did. I cleaned, I appointed, I established. It was all good when I stopped touching it. And that's important. That he knew, he came, he did what he was supposed to, he put his hands on what he was supposed to, and when he was done, it was good. Reminds you of the beginning of the Bible, right? Genesis 1. God did a very similar thing. That's what we're getting at here. He says, look, this is what I did. I did like you. I behaved how I was supposed to. And so what's his conclusion? We had it answered once already. Give me it again. Yeah. Remember me, oh my God, for good. Because Nehemiah's not an idiot. He goes away for a couple of years. He comes back. Everything's falling apart. What do you think's going to happen when he dies? What do you think's going to happen when his back is so bent that he can't walk the walls anymore? What's going to happen when the next generation comes up and he can't get out of his chair anymore, and so they don't even come and consult him? So he doesn't even need to die for him to lose his influence. So he needs God to know, and he needs to know that God knows. I think that might be more important. He needs to know that God knows that he did good. That's what he wants to be remembered for. Any other thoughts?
Good leaders always have somebody coming along behind them that they claim. He didn't do that.
No, we get no impression of who he was intending to leave behind. We get a little bit, like he picks a couple of guys to be rulers of Jerusalem and things like that, but we don't get the impression like Paul does, where Paul, he gets attached to some names all over the place, and then we see those names do things. We don't see that with Nehemiah. Even historically, I don't know of anything associated with Nehemiah like that. Any comments anybody has? Any thoughts? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, let's do a quick review here. I don't know how quick it's going to be because I talk a lot. Ben. Go for it. Mm-hmm.
And we see in the beginning of Nehemiah, we see some of the enemies of the project, the enemies of the people named, and in the end of the book, the high priest is associated with two of those names.
Yeah.
And it's just like, really?
Did he not read the book of Nehemiah? This is why it's so valuable we have them. I think we take that for granted, that we can just go back and read and like, oh, I see all these lessons. They had to live them first. Then we get to learn from them. So let's go back to chapter 1. Matt's broken down his 4 parts for us, so let's take these parts step by step here and remind us of the process here that Nehemiah followed. Nehemiah chapter 1. Chapter 1 is about returning to Jerusalem. I can't even say returning, going to Jerusalem. He's never been there before. Why does he decide to go? Yeah. He hears it's in bad shape, and he says, look, we've got to do something about this. And he mourns about it, if you remember. He mourns for a little while, several months time period. He mourns about this. And then, when he finally reaches a conclusion, kind of get the point that he was getting things ready in his mind, he's kind of seeing what he could do about it. They get down to the drinking capital, and he comes to the king with it. How does the king notice it? This is chapter 2 now. How does the king know Nehemiah has a problem? Yeah, he just keeps frowning in front of me. I don't want that. Get the frown off your face. Turn your frown upside down. That's Artaxerxes right here. Yes. So they have this conversation back and forth. Ultimately, Nehemiah requests, can I go? Can I go? And he asks for some things from Artaxerxes. What did he ask from Artaxerxes? A lot of help. Give me a whole bunch of letters. I need a letter to the keeper of the king's forest so that I can get some timber. I need some authority so that I can say letters to the governors to say, don't kill me as I'm coming through. And yeah, I'm allowed to build this wall. I need all these kinds of things. And Artaxerxes gives it to him. No problem. Just gives it to him. Any comments anybody has before we start making our way actually to Judah? So Nehemiah, yeah. Yeah, I agree that this is totally makes the argument that you need to work for everybody as for the Lord. Yeah, Lee? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an important lesson. So he makes his way to Judah. He arrives in Jerusalem, and he walks around for a few days telling nobody what he's doing. What was he doing for those first few days? Yeah. He wanted to see it with his own eyes. Where is it broken? Where are there resources? Where is there a big pile of rocks that aren't quite as broken as that big pile of rocks over there? He needs to know all these things. And if he had asked the nobility, he would have been lied to. Let's just be honest. That's called politics, right? They would have just lied and sent their guys out there to clean up behind them. They'd have tried to cover it up. So he does it without telling them where he's going. He does it in the dark, totally just throwing them entirely off, which would flip you out, right? I mean, imagine you're here, you're in Jerusalem, you're a Jew, you're doing fine, and a representative from Artaxerxes comes with letters in his hand. I'd be pretty scared, because the last time Persia came here was not so great. Be pretty worried about this. Finally, he gets them ready. He gathers everybody together. My favorite line is in verse 16 of chapter 2. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing. I had not told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, and the rest who were to do the work. You can see Nehemiah's mindset. They don't even know they're going to be doing anything yet, and he already has them given tasks. In his mind, he says, all the rest that are going to be working. They don't even know it. It's a great line. So he gets them together. He says, you're going to build the wall, and we're introduced to Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem, not Gershom, Geshem, the Arab, these three individuals who seem to be Persian governors or Persian officials in the region, all of which are mentioned outside of Scripture as well, thanks to Persia's, thanks to Persia's record keeping. We got a lot of that. Okay, chapter 3. Build the wall. That's chapter 3. Eliashib stands up with everybody. They get everybody together. And chapter 3 is a big, long list of this family stood here and built that. And that's it. Matt?
I think it's fascinating the list begins with Eliashib,
Yeah.
with the guy we saw in multiple relative by marriage of all the bad guys. He is probably the one who is telling them all this stuff that Nehemiah is doing, and yet he is here doing the work, which I guess shows you that people are awfully comfortable.
Yes, and I think that's important of why it's so good to go back and do a review. Because then once you know who the actual villains are, then you go back and you're like, oh, wow, they were villains all through that. It's kind of like with Judas, right? You read what he does, then you go back and you're like, wow, he was that's the same guy? Definitely changes your reading. So we got chapter 3, wall gets built. Okay, chapter 4, what was going on while wall being built? That's chapter 4. So chapter 4, we've got a lot of opposition coming up. Chapter 4 is all about the external opposition. What are some of the external things that happened to try to stop the wall from being built? Yeah, we're going to make fun of you. Okay, we all learned when we're this high that he's effective. You want to stop somebody from being smart in class? Tease them. They're going to stop. I mean, we learned. It works. And just because now you're this high doesn't mean it's any less effective. So they're going to try that one first because it's cheap. And so, yeah, they make fun of it. They make fun of the wall. They say nothing's going to help. God's not even listening to you. You guys are just idiots. I mean, they say tons of stuff there. And Nehemiah keeps them going. What's another thing? Yeah, and I'm not even actually sure that they intended to do an attack. They kind of just made it sound like they were going to. Which, okay, that's stage 2, right? You got somebody in front of you and you don't like what they're doing. You start by teasing them and making fun of them and mocking them to get them to stop. Well, that doesn't work. Well, then I'm going to puff myself up and get up in your face. That's what they're doing. They don't have any intention of throwing a punch. That's paperwork. It's Persia, remember? Yeah, they intended to take the one guy out, but you don't want to fight the guy and his team. You just want to fight that guy. Yeah. How are they going to get him out? I'm not sure that's in this chapter, but let's talk about it because they had a plan. How are they going to get Nehemiah away from Jerusalem? You guys remember? Yeah, come on out here. We'll eat together and we'll have like a peace talk. And where was he supposed to go? He's supposed to go out into the supposed Judah-controlled territory that Judah doesn't control. Yeah, he didn't fall for that one. Chapter 5. What were some of the things that happened on the inside that were hindering the work? Yeah, we've got some complaining people here. I think they're a little justified in their complaints, though. We've got in verse 2, with our sons and our daughters we were many, so let us get grain that we may eat and keep alive. And they're saying we're mortgaging our fields, our vineyards, and our houses to get grain because of the famine. I can't work. You want me here? We've got a famine out there, and my kids are in slavery. And they're enslaved to who? To Jews. Blows Nehemiah's mind, right? And that's verse 6 of chapter 5 all the way down through verse 13 there, where he yells at them for a little while, saying that they're really no better than Persians. I mean, they're no better than the people who enslaved us for all of this time. And then makes them give it all back. So really, sin doesn't pay off. I mean, at the end, you give it all back, right? Yeah. I feel like there's a parable about that or something. I mean, I don't know. Some smart person in the New Testament talked about it. Clay.
Verse 7 here is kind of unique. I took counsel with myself.
Yeah.
You know, Proverbs would say you're a fool.
Yeah.
Just ask yourself. But here he takes counsel with himself. I think it goes to show his extreme high character.
Yeah. And if you're surrounded by fools, Proverbs also talks about getting advice from fools. It's kind of a difficult situation he's in. Ben.
It also might have to do with verse 6 where he starts out by saying, then I was very angry when I heard. So some of the counsel, or my version says I consulted with myself. Some of that might have just been taking inventory of his emotions.
Yeah.
Controlling, quantifying everything, figuring out, how do I need to go about this before he just goes out and starts tearing their hair out.
Yeah. They need to know you before you tear their hair out. Good 14 years. Yeah. Matt.
And to expand on a point that you made, if Nehemiah is going to take counsel with somebody else, who is that somebody else going to be? Because he is bringing charges against the nobles and the officials who should have been his counsel. That the people who should have been most useful to him and keeping everybody else in line, they were the ones who were out of line.
What? You mean Eliashib wasn't a good person to talk to? Huh. There may have been something there. Yeah, they were a mess. They're very Persian. So we conclude there in chapter 5 talking about the giving. Nehemiah talks about his own giving, that he takes care of his own food. He doesn't take the allowance that is applied to him for the 12 years that he's governor. And he talks about that quite a bit to make sure that nobody can accuse him of profiting like the people that he just yelled at. I am not them. This is what they did. This is what I do. Okay. We've talked about chapter 6 a little bit already. This is, please come out here. We won't kill you. And totally they would have. That was in chapter 6 here, really most of chapter 6. From verse 15 down through verse 19 of chapter 6, we saw them finish the wall. How long did it take to finish the wall? 52 days. 52 days and they can call it a wall. Now, they probably did more work to it after 52 days, because let's just be honest, you can't build a house in 52 days. So the wall is probably not great, but it's a wall. You run up to it, you've got to do something to get over it. That's a wall. And so now they can defend themselves. And we talked about at this point, we see them shift in their mindset. They have dominion now. They can exert their will on the surrounding community, and everybody flips out about it. All the neighbors are filled with fear, and they just don't know how to handle it because you've got a new nation that has reappeared. It's an old nation, but it's brand new here. And they got an army, because they're going to talk about how many fighting men do we have? How many can we put in the field? Can we exert our will? Because if you put your flag down and say we're a country and somebody comes along and just whacks you out of it, you're not a country. You've got to be able to defend yourself. And that's what they're doing here at the end of chapter 6 and the beginning of chapter 7. Any comments?
Well, it seems like they're doing, still doing the same things they were doing when God said, I'm going to take this land away from you. You're taking advantage of each other. You're charging usury. You're too wealthy. You've had a list of things like that they're still doing. Was Nehemiah's prayer the first time we have recorded prayer of repentance for all the sins of Israel? I don't see that in Ezra.
I think Daniel says something about, Daniel has one. But I think those might be the only two I really know of. Other than, there's some kings occasionally that do, but I kind of put them in a different, I don't know, that seems different to me. But yeah.
What they're doing and what it's doing without punishing people in the land.
No, they really don't change a whole lot. The biggest change here is that they don't go after idolatry. Monotheism really becomes real during the days of Ezra and Nehemiah. Previous to that, they're monotheism in name pretty much only. But from this point forward, they really only worship one God. They just change how they do it a lot. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Chapter 7, the rest of it, is a big, long list of names. I made a big deal about this list because it kind of shows how Israel is starting to categorize themselves. And they lump themselves into three primary groups. What are the three primary groups? Judah and Benjamin. Yep, that's one. The priests and the Levites. Those three categories. They still do that today. It's even more important post AD 70. They really get into it a lot more, and they get to it today. Any other thoughts anyone has? Okay. And I made a big deal about the reasoning behind that is because a lot of what it mattered of who your father was and who your tribe was tied to land. They all live in Jerusalem or Judah now, so who cares what your tribe is? You're Judah. That's just all it is. Chapter 8. Chapter 8 is a hinge in the book of Nehemiah. This is the full. To me, this is the central chapter. We always remember Nehemiah because of building of the wall, but this is, to me, Nehemiah's great achievement, and that is the reading of the law and the recommitting themselves to that law. Ezra stands up. He reads the law to the people. He reads for a long time. They discuss it. They reason amongst themselves. They've got people going out amongst them who are supposed to know the law and discussing the law. In verse 8 it says, they read from the book, from the law of God clearly, and they gave the sense so the people understood the reading. So if you didn't know the language or you didn't know the wording, or you're like, wait a second, this is like 1,000 years ago. We don't even speak that Hebrew anymore, like us with English. They explained it. And then, how did the people respond? Verse 9. You really know it because Nehemiah says, stop doing it. What were they doing? They were crying. They're weeping. They're mourning because they read the law, they heard these words, and they got it. That's important. They got it. To use its parallel in the New Testament's passage, when Peter and the rest stood up and spoke, when they got it, how does it describe it in Acts 2? They were cut to the heart. That's our parallel here. And Nehemiah, what does Nehemiah tell them to do? Dry your eyes. You are already God's people. Go and celebrate. What does Peter say? Yeah, repent and be baptized. And then go and celebrate. Catch that? Because they weren't God's people anymore. That's why these two passages, it really sticks out to me, Nehemiah 8 and Acts 2, because they're so parallel until you get to that point, and then you're like, whoa! Nehemiah says you're okay. You know what you're supposed to do. You go on. You're already his people. But Peter says, no, you gotta do something here. Then you can go and you can celebrate. Any thoughts before we move further with chapter 8? Matt?
It also occurs to me that the wall is pretty closely connected to this.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the case of the wall, what it is, it's a physical division between the Jews and the outsiders. This is the spiritual division between God's people and the outsiders. All of this is about establishing them as people who aren't just going to dissolve into the mass of all of the other peoples of that region. They're going to be different. They're going to be God's people.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Any other thoughts? Lee? These are much more we occurrences. Yeah, you're exactly right. They celebrate their first feast in who knows how long. What feast did they find? What feast did they do? Feast of Booths. How exciting it was. And we talked about how they skip over a feast. They go straight from, we're going to blow the trumpets, to Feast of Booths, and they skip over the middle feast. What was that middle feast? It's like the most important one in like everything. It's the Day of Atonement. Why would you have to skip over the Day of Atonement? You need one guy who's really important. Yeah, you got to have a high priest. And Eliashib does not seem to have been established at this point, because it talks about there was no one that could use the Ummim and the Thummim, or Urim and the whatever. And that's a high priest. That was his role. And so they don't have anybody that can do it yet. Therefore, that was back in chapter 7, verse 65. No one had one. No one could use it. So they don't have a high priest, so no one can go into the Holy of Holies. Nobody can take the sins away and things like that. But they can do the Feast of Booths. Now, next time it rolls around, we're probably going to see Eliashib, because we see a lot of things happen from this point forward. We see the cleansing of the people, the cleansing of the priests and Levites are really getting going. They check all of their ancestry, and they're working on all this stuff, but doesn't seem like they were ready for it on the day that they really needed him. So they go right by it. Chapter 9. In chapter 9, it is a collective prayer. It is their speaking to God. It is them trying to pour out in their hearts to the Lord as a people what they feel and what they think. They start with a big, long discourse that its whole purpose is to prove what? Yeah. God says he would be faithful, and he did, and we sinned a whole bunch. That's it. We are sinners. We are terrible. Sorry. That's the majority of the prayer. We get down there to verse 31. That's it. You read all of 9. From 32 down through verse 37, they start to get more into commitment wording and arrangement wording. It talks about, in verse 32, now therefore our God, the great, the mighty, the awesome God, who keeps covenant and steadfast love, let not all the hardship seem little to you that has come upon us, upon our kings, our princes, our priests, our prophets, our fathers, and all of your people since the time of the kings of Assyria until this day. You have been righteous, and you have dealt faithfully. We have acted wickedly. And you read down through here, he talks about the good things. In verse 35, in their own kingdom, amid your great goodness that you gave to them, and the large and rich land that you set before them, they did not serve you. Behold, we are slaves this day in the land you gave your fathers to enjoy its fruit and its good gifts. Behold, we are slaves, and its rich yield goes to the kings who you have set over us. They rule over us. But we will make a firm covenant in writing with you. We've got a lot of new wording here, where we're not just talking about terrible things, but they moved into this land that is good, this land that is profitable, this land that you gave to our fathers to be plentiful, this land that will reap, that's what you gave to them, and they acted wickedly. This is the unstated, they acted wickedly in this wonderful land. If you give us the wonderful land, we will not. Well, we know they do. But that's the arrangement that they make with God. It's almost the same kind of arrangement made over there in Deuteronomy, if you read between God and his people. Any comments anybody has before we go on to chapter 10? Okay. Chapter 10 is a big, long list of names. You guys remember that? Yeah. These are the people who signed it. This is the bottom of the declaration, that we are going to do it. These are the heads of the families. These are the governors. These are priests. These are important individuals saying we will be the ones to follow it. The rest of the people also joined themselves into this covenant. And we talked about just a moment ago from chapter 13, they make 3 main commitments in the law. Really 4, because they say we'll do all of the law. But then they make 3 main commitments. We're going to do 3 specific things. What are those 3? Tithe, not intermarry, Sabbath. And we know those are the ones they break in chapter 13. But that's their commitment, down there from verse 29 through the end of the chapter. That's the commitment that they make. They pick those three out and specifically say, these are the ones that we will do. Anybody got any comments before we talk about chapter 11? Yep.
I strongly suspect that is not a coincidence, that Nehemiah is focusing their attention on these three things because he knows that these are the three things they're going to have the biggest struggle.
Well, let's be honest. How many of you really have struggled with don't murder? I mean, for most of us, it's probably never going to be a problem. There's potential, right? But for most of us, it's not. But giving 10% of your income in a hard year? All right, some of us probably could struggle with that one. Remembering that one day every week I have to do nothing? Some of us could struggle with that one. Falling in love? I mean, everything written in the last century has told us, oh, I fell in love, I can't control that. So you got married? I mean, you can just see these are real life issues that most everybody's going to encounter and have some difficulty with. Some of the other laws you may never have to worry about. Leprosy on the side of your house, is it leprous or not? It's not really a big one that I need to commit to, right? That's more Leviticus. Read the book. Any comments anybody has? Okay. These are the ones we've done pretty recently, so I'm not going to belabor our review here in this section. Chapter 11 talks again about a big long list of who lives inside the provinces. The big important thing to take out is found there in verses 1 and 2. How do they decide who will live in Jerusalem? By lot. What was the percentage? 10%, also known as a tithe. They have tithed of the people to live inside of the holy city of God. It's not insignificant, not just to be glossed over. They didn't say 35%. They said 10. Numbers in the Bible matter. And so that's another very important thing. We can see it's a holy thing. It's a righteous thing that they're doing. But they did also allow, and it seems like in verse 2, that some people volunteered as well. But they specifically took 10% of everybody to live inside of Jerusalem. And then we get a list of those individuals that did, all through chapter 11 and into chapter 12. Chapter 12 emphasizes the priesthoods under Zerubbabel and the priesthoods under Joachim down there in verse 12, and then finally Eliashib in verse 22. So following the guy we knew was high priest, even though he doesn't seem to be functioning as high priest until later on in the book. Interestingly enough, it does seem to take several years to establish a high priest. Anytime the Jews lost a high priest, you look at their history, there's always a period of like 2 or 3 years before the next guy is made high priest. It's just kind of an interesting thing. I don't know why. Just that's the way it happens. And so that may be what we see. He comes back, Eliashib's not functioning as high priest. Took 2 or 3 years. All right, anybody got any thoughts before we, well, I guess we're pretty well done. Chapter 13, we did that review here just a little bit ago. Anybody got any thoughts? Matt? And then...
Just one final note on chronology with respect to the now before this.
Yeah.
It would seem really weird if Nehemiah had waited for several years to dedicate the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think now before this refers to the stuff later in Nehemiah 13. Because it sure seems like Nehemiah 1 through 12 very early. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden the stuff in 13 happens.
Yeah. Works for me. Dick, you had a comment?
Yeah, it's not just Nehemiah, but I've always had trouble placing, well, we've got a remnant coming back.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Judah was the only area that the Persians took. Assyria demolished the country they took, and they pretty much spread out the captives,
Mm-hmm.
so they would filter into land and be lost as a nation or international community. So is it primarily, are the only people that were taken by the Babylonians that are coming back and they're settling here in Judah because that's the only nation left at that time?
I don't know of anywhere where it explicitly says it, but that's the impression that we're given, is Judah is all that returned. They don't settle Samaria. They don't try to settle Samaria. So it seems as though nobody has any concern for that. But if you came from Israel, the northern nation of Israel, it seems like you would be concerned. You'd want your land. But they only care about Judah. And within 100 years or so from this point, a little over 100, when Alexander comes through and they get that restructuring, they really only keep Jerusalem. They lose a lot of their land, but that is what was important to them. So it does seem very Judah-centric. Matt.
That's basically it. I think it's a little more complicated. In 2 Chronicles 30, you see Hezekiah sending out letters to the remnant of the northern tribes. And there are some who come to Jerusalem, which is why you see people like Anna the prophetess and Luke, who is of the tribe of Asher.
Yeah.
So there is a minority of people who are not literally of the tribe of Judah, but the people of the tribe of Judah are so overwhelmingly represented that it's basically the Jews from now on.
Yeah. That's why they get called Jews. Judah. Jews. Benjamin hardly gets referenced anymore from this point forward. Any other thoughts anybody has? We have like 4 minutes. I don't feel like I should get into any new information on the last day of class, in the last 4 minutes of class, in Matt's class. Yeah, you had a comment? No? Okay. So this is Nehemiah. From this point forward, the Jews go through a lot of stuff. We have the Greeks come through, which they have to deal with, which causes the dichotomy of Greek Jewish religion and Jewish religion. Then we have the revolt that happens, where they take control for 100 years and they try to clean it all up, but they really just create a big mess. And then we have Rome come in and they muddle everything up, and out of that comes Pharisees and Sadducees and Zealots and Essenes, and then we get to Christ. And it all goes back to Nehemiah and the foundations that Nehemiah laid. Things like picking and choosing important passages. Like they said, we'll do everything, especially these 3. Doesn't that sound like a Pharisee? So there's some foundational work that was being laid here that they struggle with later on. Okay, anybody got any thoughts? Because I'm pretty well done. Yeah? Yeah. Because that's true. I mean, if we are God's people, and that's what you are. You know, we've been, from our perspective, you've been baptized, you've done wrong. Once you've identified it, that's called repenting. I mean, that's that identification, and we're not going to do that anymore. You move on. You go into the joy, and it's such a fast shift as the scriptures define it. And Nehemiah is a pretty good place to look at for that. See? It's 2 minutes early now. All right, thank you very much.